The frost had welded the coach door shut, so they took her out through the window. Josiah Pell went first, boots ringing on the cobbles of a yard she did not yet know, and then he reached back and drew her through the carriage window by the wrist, the way a man lifts down a bolt of cloth he has already paid for. £4, or the widow, he called to the mounted man across the yard, cheerful as a fair day. Take the widow. She eats less than a horse and breeds no better. Mercy Aldous came down onto the stones of Ravensmoor in her one good dress. She did not fall. She did not thank him. She had known the words were coming, since the debt was reckoned in Colt Hallow, and a thing you have foreseen cannot be made to hurt you fresh. Horses taught that lesson before men ever did. The mounted man did not answer the jest. He sat, a tall grey some distance off, wrapped against the cold, and looked at her the way a man looks at a bill he cannot pay and cannot dispute. That would be the Duke, Gabriel Thorne, sixth of that name, who had let his brother be buried, and his stable shut, and his grief harden over the both of them like ice over a well. "Nay, take her back," one groom muttered to another, not low enough. House buys itself a coper's leavings now. That's what we're come to. None of them asked why a horse-leech's daughter had let herself be handed over to this house for the last £4 of her dead husband's horse debt. A bargain she had offered and not been forced to, or what she already knew that they did not. She was still learning the place, a great shuttered seat with half its windows blind, when the sound came from the dark end of the stable, a scream, high and torn and rising. Every man in the yard went stiff with it, and a look passed between two of the lads that she knew at once. They thought the sound was murder in a horse, the settled madness of a beast that had killed and would kill again. She heard it otherwise. A frightened thing and a vicious thing do not sound alike, and that noise from the killing box at the black end of the row was fear, old fear, worn smooth, a horse afraid of a thing that came to it again and again, and not one soul here had troubled to learn the difference. She kept her face still. One man in the yard did not look at her at all. Pell haggled, the grooms gaped, the Duke sat his grey like a monument to a battle already lost. This one stood by the tackroom door with a head collar over his arm, and gave the scream no more mind than the wind, a man who had heard it every day for 3 years, and knew to the hour when it would come and cease. She marked him, and did not yet know his name was Simeon Vaux. Off past the kitchen a stout woman crossed with a churn on her hip, stopped, took the measure of Mercy in a hard glance, and went on. Slower, though. "Well," said Pell, pocketing something, well pleased. "There's your £4 settled, the fare 8 weeks off, and no more owing between us." He tipped his hat to the Duke, and to Mercy not at all. "She's a quiet one. You'll get no trouble of her." He was wrong, though it would be spring before any of them knew how wrong. The Duke gathered his reins. He had not spoken one word to her, nor she to him, and the horse at the dark end screamed again into the cold, and Mercy Aldous, given over for the last £4 of a dead man's debt, looked down that shuttered row toward the sound no one else could read, and thought, "I know why I am here. Not one of you does." The cold had followed her indoors, and by supper time it had settled in the great house as though it paid no rent anywhere else. They gave her a wedding of sorts before they gave her a meal, a curate with a running nose, an archbishop's special license bought express so a duke might wed within his own walls, 2 words in a chapel that smelled of cold stone and mice, and a register signed and dated before 2 witnesses fetched in from the kitchen. Mercy Aldous became a duchess in the time it took to boil an egg. What the county took for a grieving man's whim had a colder root. His father's will bound the whole estate to his marrying before the spring fair, else Ravensmoor and every horse in it passed to the next man in the entail. So a paper wife had been sought through Pell, the coper, the horse-dealer, who brokered such matters as he brokered beasts, separate rooms, an independent settlement promised her in her own right, Nothing more asked of either side. Pell held the note of Mercy's dead husband against the last £4 of the debt, and when she learned the terms the Duke wanted, she made herself the answer before another candidate could be found. Supper was 2 of them at the end of a table meant for 20, the candles guttering, the house listening. That was the thing she marked first. A great house should have the settle and tick of a thing lived in, but this one held itself watchful and half-turned from its own stable, in the wary stillness of a badly handled horse that will not trust the space behind its own shoulder. Not peace, but management. "You should know what you have married," Gabriel Thorne said, when the soup had come and gone, untouched by either of them. She waited. "My brother died on a horse of this house. Kit, 16. He turned his glass a quarter turn on the cloth, and did not drink from it. The county calls the colt a killer. They are right to. I kept the beast. I let the boy ride in that yard. I looked at nothing and asked nothing, and so I killed him, as surely as if I had thrown him myself." He said it flat, the way a man reads a charge he has already pleaded guilty to. "You have married that man." Mercy looked at him a long moment. A horse run too long on a bad leg favors the sound side without knowing, its whole body organized around a pain it will not name. He sat his chair exactly so. She said only, "You've had 3 years to say that of yourself. You say it very smooth." Something moved behind his eyes and was put away. Practice. The stout woman from the yard came in with the meat, set it down hard, and gave Mercy the flat measuring look of before, grey at the temple, hands scalded red from a life of hot water and hotter ovens. "Nan Sowerby," the Duke said. "She has cooked in this house longer than I've been in it." "And'll cook in it after," Nan said, unbothered, and to Mercy, "There's them here as measure a body by what it costs. Sold, bought, £4 and such like." Her eyes flicked once to the door Vaux had stood by. "Don't let 'em teach it you." She set a hot brick wrapped in flannel by Mercy's feet without asking leave. "That black at the end's fed wrong. His bucket goes out heavier than any horse on the place and comes back with muck in the bottom. No clean bran ever left. I've said it 3 year to them as won't hear it." "Nan?" said a voice from the passage, even, unhurried. Simeon Vaux stood in the doorway with the head collar still over his arm. "The kitchen wants you." Nan went. She did not hurry, but she went. Vaux stayed in the passage. He addressed the Duke, in the voice of a good servant who has carried a hard house on his back, and asks no thanks for it. "Your Grace, if her ladyship is to bide here, she'll want the way of the stable. The grey mare's not to be handled on your own order given after Master Kit, nor the black colt neither. It's no place for a lady, and less for one new to us." He inclined his head, courteous as a church warden. "For her own safety, I'd have it plain from the first." "It is my order," Gabriel said, tired, not looking up. "Let it stand." "Your Grace." And Vaux was gone, soft-footed, the one man in the house who never seemed to be listening because he was the thing the house listened for. When they were alone, the Duke rose and walked her to the stair himself. To reach it, he had taken the long way round the hall, past the cold parlour, rather than the short way along the wall that backed the yard. A man will go 100 paces out of his road to keep off a leg that hurts. "You'll want your rest," he said. "I keep to the east rooms. You'll not be troubled." A pause. The self-indictment again, quieter. "You married little enough. I'll not make it less by pretending you married more." He left her at the stair. Mercy stood in the cold hall of a house that feared its own stable, and heard, from far off through the stone, the low murmur of the servants telling something to the dark. The boy that died used to whistle the grey daft, could bring her across a field with 2 notes, loved that mare better than his own kin. Her father had taught her that whistle before she could plait her hair. She found she had shaped it, dry against her teeth, no breath behind it, standing alone at the foot of a duke's stair, in a house where the grey mare was forbidden her, the black colt forbidden her, and the one man who forbade them had never once looked her in the face. She let the breath stay unspent. There would be a morning for it. Grey light came up over the moor, and it was into the frozen muckyard, in her one good dress still, that Mercy Aldous walked at the dawn of her second day, a duchess, because she had heard the lads shouting. She came round the corner of the foaling box and saw what they had already given up on. A chestnut foal down in the freezing mud, wet slicked and steaming, its dam nowhere near. 3 stable lads standing off with the stillness of men, waiting for the knacker's cord. "Off a barren mare," one said, seeing her as if that settled the beast's worth. "Come wrong, come weak, Master Vaux give the word." A foal off a mare the estate called barren. Mercy filed it, as her father had taught her to file a thing that did not sit square, and knelt. The mud took her skirts to the knee, cold as a grave, and she paid it no mind. The foal's eye rolled white, its breath shallow and quick, its ears pinned flat. She ran a hand down the wet neck, and found the pulse, fast, and not the ragged flutter of a dying thing, only the fast beat of a thing too long cold that had stopped trying. "He's not come wrong," she said low, to all of them. "He's come cold. There's a deal of difference, if any of you cared to learn it." She got her arms under the sodden body, hauled it into her lap out of the wet, and began to rub, hard, bringing the blood back up from the heart outward. Straw, and a dry sack, and whatever's warm. Nobody moved but one. He came from the back of the little knot of them, a boy of maybe 15, a stammer already working before a word was out. He brought his own coat off his back into the cold, knelt in the muck beside her, and pressed it round the foal without being asked twice. "To Dob," he managed, when she looked at him. "Dob Hartley, mistress. Rub there, Dob, where I'm not." And he did, fierce and clumsy and glad of the work. Behind them, the other lads began to fetch straw, shamed into it. It was Nan who came with the hot mash, wading across the yard with a steaming bucket, and her mouth set. "Give it here." She got a little warmed gruel into the foal off her own thick finger, and as she did, she said, not lowering her voice, "You'll mind, my lady, whose word it were to knacker a live foal at dawn quiet, afore the house is up. Same word keeps that black's bucket going out heavy and coming back fouled. I've said it 3 year, and been told to mind my churns." She wiped her finger. "There, he'll suck now." And he did. The small head came up, the ears came off their pins, and he butted blind for warmth against Mercy's ruined bodice, and something in her kept as shuttered as this house gave way for a breath. "Nobody ever asked what I was worth to something living," she said, quiet, looking down at the wet head under her hand. "Only what I cost." Dob had gone very still beside her, watching her face and not the foal. Then the yard changed. She felt it before she heard it, the lads stiffening, the herd catching the scent of the thing it feared. Simeon Vaux came across the muck unhurried, and began, mild as milk, to take his lads off the job. "Leave it, you've orders." His hand came to the nearest boy's shoulder to steer him. His left hand, the palm of it slick and hairless with some old scald she marked and thought nothing of, and Dob, still kneeling, flinched whole-bodied, a flinch with nothing to do with being touched, for the hand never reached him, a flinch learned. The very flinch, she thought, that the black colt gave at the dark end of the row. She did not yet know why boy and horse should share it. Vaux looked at her directly then, for the first time. "A mort of trouble, my lady, over a wrong 'un." "He's not wrong," Mercy said, rising, the foal steady on his feet and pushing at her hip. 6pence, she thought, for what a widow was reckoned worth, near enough. "He'll stand, I'll have him." And she carried the truth of the fouled bucket, and the flinching boy out of that yard folded small inside her, and let them think it was only a foal she had saved. She asked for the killing box, opened while the light was still low. and the whole stable held its breath, a herd gone still near what it has learned to fear. "That's not to be done," said the head lad, low. "Master Vaux, is the master here the Duke or the horsekeeper?" Mercy said mild, and it was not a question. Gabriel Thorne, who had come down to the yard because his wife had walked to the dark end of his stable, and he could not make himself stay away, said, "Open it." The colt came off the back wall as the bolt drew, a near black beast sheeted in old sweat gone to a rime of salt, wall-eyed, the smell of him nothing like a horse worked hard. Mercy stood in the doorway, not going in, not flinching, and read him. The flanks going too fast and too shallow, the sweat where no work had raised it, the eye that rolled not at her but at the near wall, the side a left hand would come from. "He's not mad," she said. "A mad horse fights the thing in front of it. This one's guarding aside." The colt screamed and struck the boards and lunged. She was already stepping flat-handed toward the swing of his head when a grip closed hard on her shoulder and hauled her back out of the arc of it. Gabriel's hand. She let it move her, turned under it, and found his face close and stricken. "Don't. His heart's going like a hunted hare." She said it low, for him, her shoulder still under his hand, and neither marking it. "Put your fingers here, under the jaw, when he'll let you. That's not rage, your grace. Rage tires. This has run at that speed for 3 years. A horse poisoned by inches, and kept just short of dying of it." His hand did not leave her shoulder. "Poisoned. Fed something that frights the body and clears slow, topped up before it clears. A vicious horse you cannot cure, a drugged one you can. Take away the drug and wait. If I'm wrong, he stays a devil, and you've lost a week's bran. If I'm right, he comes gentle, and the coming gentle names the hand that did it." She turned and found old Thady Muir at the edge of the household, 60 years of horses in his hands, and none let near this box in 3. "You've kept horses longer than I've breathed, Master Muir. Come lay your hand where I said. I'll not have it be my word they weigh." The old man came. It cost him to cross to that door, but he came, waited out a lull, laid 2 knotted fingers under the black jaw, and stood a long moment with his eyes shut like a man at prayer. 60 year, Thady said at last, hoarse. "I never felt a heart do that in a horse as weren't dying, and he ain't dying." He drew his hand back slow. "This colt's been done to." The word went round the servants like cold water. Mercy watched their faces change, not toward her but toward the box, and the thing that had lived among them under the wrong name. To Gabriel alone, under the murmur, she said the rest plain. 3 things, and I'll stake my name on each. He's drugged, not mad. The dose is kept up, or he'd have cleared long since. And it's done from the left. Whoever tends this box comes at him left-handed, and the horse has learned all its fear from one hand. Thady's grey face had gone greyer. "There's but one man goes in that box," he said. "One, these 3 year, on the Duke's own order. Behind them all, easy, the head collar over his arm, Simeon Vaux said, 'That's a deal of learning, my lady, for £4.' He smiled, and it did not reach past his mouth. I'd not wager the Duke's stable on a co-op's guesswork, but then I only keep the beasts. I don't price them." Nobody laughed. That, more than anything, was the shift, that in this yard, this once, nobody laughed with him. By noon the cold had burned off, the home paddock a shining slick, and it was there, where the whole household could see, that the Baron Mare's foal stood up on 4 legs of his own, and would not be told he was a wrong-un. 3 days of Nan's warmed mash, a dry corner, Mercy's hands night and morning, and the chestnut given up in the muck, now butted his hard head against her hip for milk hard enough to drive her back a step. "Greedy," she told him, and there was something in her face when she said it that the lads had not seen before. She did not mean to whistle. It rose the way a thing long held rises when the guard is down. 2 notes, low, her father's call, the one she had shaped dry against her teeth the night she first came. She was not calling anything. She was only letting it go. 3 heads came up along the far fence. The weanlings she had handled these 2 mornings, hand-raised orphans the yard had let run ragged, lifted off the grass as one, and came to her at the trot, ears pricked forward. Sixpence swung to face them, and for a moment 4 young horses were gathered to one woman in a yard that had not seen a horse come to hope in 3 years. Gabriel Thorne stood at the corner of the tack room and watched it. She marked him without turning. He had come the long way round again. She knew his roads now, but he had come. He stood with his hand on the cold stone and watched his dreaded yard fill with soft eyes and forward ears at 2 notes off his wife's mouth. The thing in him that had held its shape around a pane for 3 years shifted its weight once and did not know it had. "They come to her," he said to Thady, low as if he needed another man to say it before he could believe it. The old groom had come to the rail. He watched the weanlings mob her, and took his hat off to a coper's widow sold for £4. "I've kept horses 60 year, your grace," Thady said. He did not lower his voice, and the lads were near enough, and Nan in the kitchen door, and that was the point of it. Man and boy, under 3 dukes. I never saw a hand like it, nor a truer eye. Whatever she come here as, and he looked at her level, she's a horsewoman. I'll say it where any may hear. It went round the servants, the way the other word had gone round the box, but warm this time, the herd turning toward a thing instead of away. Nan in the doorway wiped her hands on her apron, and did not trouble to hide her face. Mercy said nothing. She had learned young that to answer a thing like that was to make it smaller, so she only laid her hand flat on Sixpence's neck, and let the old man's words stand, and did not tell them her chest had gone tight. Then a voice came too hearty over the near rail, and the herd of the yard stiffened at once. "Now there's a picture." Josiah Pell had ridden in on fair business, hat pushed back, all teeth. He leaned on the rail as a man leans who wants to be seen easy, and Mercy read the ease as she read a horse showing itself off for a buyer, head carried high and false, the body saying, "Look how sound I am with nothing sound under it. Foal off a barren mare. There's a wonder, barren they told me, and the get sold as slink." He laughed, and his eyes went past her to the grey in the near paddock, and stayed a beat too long. Your grace should count his greys before the fair. A man loses track of what he's breeding. He tipped his hat. "Only a jest." It was not a jest, and Mercy knew it, even as she half doubted her own knowing. Men are not easy with the things they mean. And at his shoulder, come up soft, head collar over his arm, Simeon Vaux turned and looked at her, full at her for the first time since the carriage window, not past her, not through her, but the long, steady look a man gives a thing he has decided he must now account for. She met it and let the whistle die on her lips, and thought, "There, now you see me." The corner of the tack room where Kit's things still hung kept its own cold, and Gabriel Thorne stood in its doorway, his boots unable to carry him across the sill. 3 years. The room had kept its own weather, and his brother's smell too, saddle soap and neat's foot oil. A snaffle on the hook where Kit had left it, a coat too small for anyone now. 16 years of a life on 3 pegs, dusted over, and Gabriel stood at the edge of it as he stood at the edge of the yard, the long way round, the leg he would not put weight on. Mercy went in for him. She did it as she did everything in his house, without asking leave he could not have given, gentle as with a thing that would break at a wrong step. She lifted the snaffle off its hook and turned it in the light. No poor boy, no how sad, none of the words the county had worn smooth on Kit's grave, only the bit turned in her hand as a workwoman turns a tool. "Come here," she said. "Give me your hand." He did not want to, but came anyway over the sill at last, into the cold that smelled of his brother, and she took his hand as she'd take a lad's to show him a thing, and laid his fingers down the foreleg of the saddle horse in the crossties, along the cannon, into the warm groove behind the bone. There, that cord under your fingers, that's a tendon sound, cool and tight and gives you nothing. She moved his hand up, patient. A hurt one's hot and thick and flinches off you. You'd know the difference in the dark once you'd felt both. Shut your eyes. I don't. Shut your eyes. Your fingers know more than your grief will let them. He shut his eyes. Her hand stayed over his against the horse's leg, and neither let go as fast as they should have. Gabriel stood in the room he could not enter with the stranger's hand warm over his own, and something in the frozen middle of him cracked and ran for the first time in 3 years. Kit could do this, he said. The words came up on their own out of the crack. Blind. He'd stand in the dark and run a hand down a leg and tell you which foreleg a horse had favoured a week gone. He opened his eyes. That I have never let myself say plainly, because it is not survivable. A boy who could read a horse in the dark does not get run away with by a fresh colt at a walk into water. Something took that horse from him. She had gone still, her hand over his, and he understood she had known this a long time and only waited for him to bear the knowing. I buried it under the guilt, he said. I killed him by inattention. I have said that 100 times, and a wound I can live inside, because a wound is only pain, but if it was not inattention. He stopped. If someone did this, I did not fail my brother. I let his killer keep my stable 3 years and call me master. That is not a wound. That is a thing I would have to act on, and I have not had the constitution for it. She turned his hand over and read the back of it as she read the Colt, the freckle map across his wrist, the old rain callus, and the terror came on him, quiet and total. The county, in a jest across a carriage window, had brought into his house the one creature who could ruin him twice. Once by proving him a fool, once, worse, by making him want to live long enough to be a fool forgiven. My father kept a daybook, she said low, still holding his wrist, a horse-leech's ledger, a horse doctor's book, every beast he doctored, every deal he stood witness to. The season before he died, he sold this house a grey mare's whole line, then lost her. Barren, they wrote her. He never believed it. He wrote in the margin, in his own hand, that a mare doesn't go barren the same year her price triples. He died certain something had been done, and none to hear it but a coper's daughter. She let his hand go. I have the book. Gabriel looked at her across the cold room where his brother's coat hung too small on its peg, and did not take his hand back, and was more afraid of her than of any horse in his stable. Then we are neither of us mad, he said. God help us both. First light lay bright on the home paddock when Mercy carried her father's whistle down to the rail, and spent it, at last, on the grey. She had waited for a morning alone with the mare, or as alone as a duke's yard allowed, Gabriel at her shoulder, come the long way round again, Dob loitering at the gate. The grey stood mid-paddock in the cold steam of her breath, a well-made animal grazing with the ease of a horse never asked a hard question. Mercy set 2 notes against her teeth and let them go. Kit's call, her father's call, the whistle the whole servants' hall swore could bring Damson across a field before the boy could count to 10. The mare did not flick an ear. Mercy whistled again, cleaner, carrying, nothing. The grey lifted her head as any horse lifts its head at any sound, incurious, then went back to the frozen grass. A champion supposed to have known that call since a filly, a mare a dead boy had loved daft, and no more answer in her than in a gate-post. She's deaf, belike, said Dob, from the gate, hopeful, because the other thing was worse. She hears you fine. Mercy did not raise her voice. She turned to the barrow squeak twice. She hears. She only doesn't know it. She rested her forearms on the rail and looked at the mare as her father had taught her to look at a beast a man was trying to sell as something it was not at the whole animal, which lies, but at the parts, which cannot. Your Grace, fetch me the stud book, the old one in your father's hand. He went himself, and came back with a great foxed ledger, the spine gone soft, the old Duke's copperplate marching down the pages. Mercy found the mare's own entry, set down 15 years past, when Damson was a foal at foot, in a dead man's hand. Damson, she read low, grey filly, off the Ravensmoor line, splint, near 4, thrown as a yearling, never lamed her, but stands proud of the bone, may be felt. Wall-eyed, offside. She read it twice, then lifted her eyes to the mare, 30 feet off. 2 clean forelegs, not a splint on either, and the eye that sighed as brown and whole as the other. Look for yourself, she said, and Gabriel came to the rail, and she showed him the words a dead man had set down for the mare he bred, then the living animal that carried neither. The old Duke wrote her plain, a splint you could feel, proud of the near 4, a wall-eye offside. 15 years back in his own pen, before ever I was in this county. She closed the book on her thumb. That mare has clean legs and 2 brown eyes. Whatever she is not the horse your father wrote in this book. Gabriel had gone very still. She has stood in that paddock 4 years. She has stood in that paddock 4 years being called Damson. Old Thady had come up on the far side, drawn by the whistle that failed. Master Muir, when did you last handle the grey? Truly handle her, feel her legs, pick her feet. The old man's jaw worked. Not since, no, not in 4 year, near. He said it slow, hearing it as he said it. Master Vaux keeps her particular, on the Duke's order, nervy since the boy, best left to one hand, and a man don't argue the mare he's told to leave be. His face was going grey. 4 year, I've took his word she were the same mare, and never laid a hand on her to know. Because there was no reason to, Mercy said, not unkindly. One grey looks much like another, to a man not hunting the difference. That's how it's done. She looked back at the placid stranger. A mare that throws champions doesn't go to grass. She goes to stud, where the money is, quiet, off the books. A barren look-alike in her place, so nobody counts a foal missing. Find me the grey with a splint and a wall-eye, and I'll show you the mare this house still thinks it owns. Then a colder thing came to her, and she said it low, for Gabriel alone. Kit could call Damson across a field with 2 notes. The whole hall says it. He'd known that mare since she was a filly at foot. She let it settle. The morning they walked the true grey out, and stood this stranger in her stall, the boy would have whistled and had no answer, and known inside a day what has taken me a fortnight to prove. He'd have gone straight to you with it. Her hand tightened on the ledger. That is why he could not be let live in this yard. Kit knew the switch, or would, within the week. So the boy was made reckless in the telling, and the horse under him made a killer, and the one soul who could have named a ringer at a glance was under a stone before he ever drew the breath to. At the gate, Dob had gone rigid over his barrow, and Mercy caught it. The boy's eyes flicking to the tack-room door, and away, the whole body flinch he gave to a thing not yet in the yard, the same learned fear the black colt gave to a left hand. He knew something in his body before his mouth could shape it, and the shaping terrified him. Gabriel looked down at his father's hand a long moment, and when he spoke, it was the flat, self-indicting voice, but lower now, with a new thing under it that was not guilt. 4 years I have owned a horse that was never mine, and grieved a brother on a colt that was poisoned, and dismissed no one, and asked nothing. He shut the ledger. Say it plainly, as you have made me say the rest. My stable has been run by a thief, and I called it loyalty. I'll say it plainly when I can prove it plainly. Not before. A whistle a mare won't answer isn't a rope round a man's neck. It's a question. Say the wrong grey's a ringer to the wrong ear, and by nightfall the real one's dead in a ditch 40 miles off, and there's no proving anything again. She took the book back gently, and held it against her, and glanced once at Dob, and lowered her voice under the wind. Say it to no one, not Thady, not Nan, not the wall. From here it's ours to carry, quiet, until we can set it down where it can't be picked back up. He looked at her across the cold rail, his wife of a fortnight, holding his dead father's book like a thing she meant to give back whole, and the ground of the marriage tilted under them both, and settled at a new angle, and neither named it. Ours, he said, trying the weight of the word, and found it would bear. Behind them the ringer cropped the frozen grass, deaf to a dead boy's whistle, and far off over the ridge the true grey stood in a stranger's barn, not knowing she was still waited for. On the 8th day the frost gave over to a grey thaw, and the killer horse lipped a carrot off a boy's flat palm, and did not scream. They had done it Nan's way, the only way. Every bucket she measured herself now, dry bran through her own fingers into her own scoured pail, and logged what she found in the bottom, a mark for clean, a cross for fouled. 8 days of marks, not a cross among them. Vaux could not stop it without naming the reason he could not, so he held off his hand and let the colt eat clean, rather than insist on tending a horse the whole yard now watched him tend. Mercy had counted on that. A man who has hidden a thing in the dark cannot fight for it in the light without pointing at it. So they came, the 8th morning, to a box that no longer stank of old fear. The colt stood off the wall, flanks moving slow and deep, the whites gone from round his eye. When Mercy drew the bolt, he swung his head to the sound of it, not to guard the near wall, not to fling himself at the boards, but to look, plain and curious, at the people in his door. "Steady," she said, to the horse and the man behind her both. Dob had a carrot. She had closed his stammering fingers over it, back in the passage, because it was owed to him and no one else. He came into the doorway, white to the lips, the coat he'd given a foal now given back and hanging off him, and held it out flat on a shaking palm, as she had shown him. The black colt reached and lipped it, soft as any horse in any honest stable, took it off the boy's hand, and stood chewing with his ears loose and forward. Dob made a sound Mercy had heard men make over graves. "He took it," the boy said. The stammer had gone clean out of him, the way it does when a thing comes up from too deep to catch on the teeth. "Mistress, he took it off my hand." He was weeping, unashamed, the tears cutting the muck on his face, one hand still flat under the colt's soft mouth. "He don't hate me. All this while I thought. He never hated me." Gabriel had come to the box door behind them, and Mercy felt him go still, felt the words land where Kit's death lived, and neither said anything, because some weeping is a man's own, and to name it is to steal it. Later the colt was turned out quiet in a bare yard, 2 lads crossing themselves to see the killing box empty and its devil grazing, and later still the tack room, 1 lamp, the long day's work gone down into the quiet that comes after. She had a bridle across her knees, mending a rein, and he stood over her with the daybook she'd fetched him, unread. When she looked up he was looking at her. "You were right in every particular," he said. "Blunt as always, and then not blunt at all. I do not know what to do with a person who is right about me." "Nothing. You do nothing with them. You let them stand near." She had risen without meaning to. Her hand had come to his sleeve, to steady the book, she'd have said if asked, and it would have been a lie. He had stopped breathing, and she had stopped. The lamp threw the 2 of them up huge and trembling on the whitewashed wall, his mouth a breath from hers, neither a hand's width from a thing that could not be taken back. The door. Dobbs stood in it, wild-eyed, gulping, the mending light catching a face that had wept itself out an hour past, and was not weeping now, but something worse. "Mistress," he stopped, started. The stammer was back and fighting him for every sound. "That morning, the steeplechase, Master Vaux had me hold the black's head, hold him hard, while he worked summat under the roller. Hot it were. I smelt it hot, and he says it's liniment for a cold back, he says." He heard himself. Mercy watched it cross the boy's face, the words out in the air now, unswallowable, and the terror take him, 3 years of a man's threat closing over his head at once. "He says I'd hang," Dobb whispered. "He says if ever I—" And he was gone, bolted into the dark yard, the door swinging on the cold, and the colt he had made gentle, lifting its head somewhere in the night to the sound of the boy. It did not hate running away. The frost held past midnight, and it was into the loft over the quieted box that Mercy climbed, because she had seen the Duke go up and not come down, and a man who does not come down has stopped being able to bear his own thoughts alone. He sat with his back to a beam, and his brother's snaffle in his hands, turning it as he turned his glass at supper. Below them the black colt shifted in the straw, at ease now, a horse breathing slow through the boards like a thing mending. "You'll take a chill," she said, and sat down across from him in the hay, near enough, not too near. "I have taken worse." He set the bit down. "You did not climb a ladder in the dark to warn me of chills." No. She had meant to come to it slantwise, and found she could not. So she did what her father did with a thing that had to be said. Laid it down plain, and let it be looked at. "I climbed it to tell you all of it, and how I come to be in it, because you've let me carry half your grief up here, and it is not honest to let you think the county dropped me here by chance." He went very still. "You did not buy me, your grace. I let myself be bought." She kept her voice level, the voice she used on a frightened thing. "My father sold this house that Gray's line, lost her to a barrenness he never believed, and died certain something had been done. When Pell came to reckon my husband's debt in horses, and I saw the last £4 was to be paid at Ravensmoor, I made myself the £4. A widow sold is a widow inside the gate, and I meant to be inside this gate above any house in England. I came for your horses, for the truth of what was done to that mare and that colt." She held his eyes. "I stayed for the truth of your brother. That part I did not plan. That part is only true." She braced for the cold to come down, for she had married a man who turned formal when he was cut. "You engineered your own sale," he said at last, "to reach a stable you were then forbidden." "I did. To right a wrong done a dead horse-leech and a boy you never met. And to see justice done, if it could be. Yes." Something in his face she had not seen before, not anger, a kind of ruin. "I have spent 3 years handled by everyone here as a man too broken to be told the truth. And the one person who came on purpose, by her own hard will, came to tell it me." He said it, as if it astonished him past bearing. "May I—" He did not finish it. It was a question, plain as any she had asked of him, and she answered it by crossing the little space of hay between them. The kiss was brief and grave, his asking and her choosing both. It held 3 years of a shut house and a fortnight of 2 ruined strangers learning they were not, after all, alone. Then she drew back, before it could become a thing they must be careful of, and rested her forehead a moment against his, and that was all, and it was enough. "Then I'll ask you one thing," he said low, against the quiet. "One only." And the blunt voice broke on it, just at the edge. "Take no step in this without me. Not to Pell's, not into that box, not to the far paddock alone. I let one person I loved go into that yard by himself, and looked at nothing, and it cost me my life entire. I've not the constitution to do it twice. He did not order it, he asked it, and the asking cost him. Whatever we do it where I can stand beside you. Beside, she said, trying the word as he had tried ours at the rail, and found it too would bear. Yes, they came down before the house woke, separately, which was its own small ache, and in the grey of it, on the breakfast tray Nan carried up herself, there was a folded paper in a hand Mercy had learned to know, Vaux, even, unhurried. A proposal, laid before the Duke as loyalty, that the famous Ravensmoor grey in her get be sold at last at the Colt Hallow Spring Fair, in the Duke's own yard, before the assembled county, 5 weeks off, every buyer in the shire come to watch. Mercy read it twice, and set it down, and felt it turn over and lock into place like a bolt drawn home. He means to sell her before they can know she's a stranger, she said. In your own yard, before everyone. Then he has been a fool, Gabriel said, reading it over her shoulder, for the first time in 6 years. No. Mercy looked out the far ridge, where a true grey stood in a stranger's barn, and did not know she was still waited for. He's been careful. He's brought the whole county to the horses, so they'll see the thing he means them to see. She folded the paper along Vaux's own crease. We've only to make sure they see the other thing instead. The frost had gone soft and treacherous by the time the yard emptied of lads Gabriel had sent off on invented errands, and in the grey, unwatched quiet, Mercy meant to prove the third thing, where no man but the Duke could see her do it. The black colt stood loose-roped in the middle of the court, ears easy. A horse a fortnight of clean buckets had given back to himself. She had 3 men girth him in turn. Gabriel first, then Thady, then a broad, honest lad off the home farm who knew nothing of it. Each came at the colt plain and right-handed, and the colt stood for each, shifting his weight, blowing once, no more trouble than a cart-horse at a trough. Sound, said Thady low, watching. Sound as any beast on the place. Watch, Mercy said. She came at the colt herself then, from his near side, her left hand raised to the roller and a low 2-note chirrup in her throat, the sound the man makes soft to a horse he is about to hurt, so the hurting comes as a surprise. The colt came apart. He went rigid all down his frame. The whites came up round his eye. The sweat broke dark as though wrung from the hide. He screamed the killing box scream, the sound the whole county had buried a boy to, and flung himself sideways off her hand, the length of the rope. He stood shaking, sheeted, guarding a near wall that was not there. Mercy dropped her hand and stepped back. She stood right-handed and still, hummed low and even, and let him find it. Slow, the horse came back down into his own body. The shaking eased. The ears came off their pins. It's not the man, she said quietly to Gabriel, whose face had gone the colour of tallow. He didn't fright at me. He frighted at a left hand and that sound. Coming to his roller, any hand, any voice, he stands. That hand, that chirrup, and he's back in the morning it was done to him. A horse can't lie, your grace. He can't be got at, or paid, or frightened into a story. He only remembers the exact shape of the thing that hurt him. And this is the shape of it. Left-handed, Gabriel said. And Vaux comes at everything left-handed. You've watched him a year and never seen it, because why would you? She gentled the colt with her right hand along his wet neck. Now you'll not unsee it. There was a movement at the tack-room door. Dobb, who had drifted back against his orders, stood white in the gap with a barrow handle forgotten in his fists. He had seen it all, and his mouth was working. That's it, he got out. That's the very... He done it like that. Left, and that same little sound, low.
The stammer seized him. The rah-roller. That morning. I held him, mistress, like Master Vaux bid me, and he worked summat hot under the... And then, the daylight, the yard, the knowledge of who might be within a wall of hearing closed over the boy, and he shut his mouth on it. I can't, he whispered. Not out loud. Not here. He set the barrow down careful and went, not bolting this time, only going, a boy carrying a weight 1 honest inch further than before and no further. Let him be, Mercy said, when Gabriel moved. He'll say it when the horse says it first. There's no shaming a body out of a fear a man spent 3 years teaching. She went to Pell's alone that afternoon, and knew as she saddled the cob that she was breaking the one word she had given. Gabriel was away at the far paddock with Thady, believing her at her rest. She rode out under cover of fair business, for no one fears a widow at a gate. She told herself the lie every oath-breaker tells, that it was safer done alone, that a duke caught reading a co-op's ledger was a ruin she could spare him. It was true, and it was also a broken word, and she knew the difference, and rode on anyway. Pell waved her to the office fire to warm herself, easy as ever, and went out to see to a horse, and left her the run of the room, because who fears a widow? The book lay open on the coping desk, where a busy man leaves it. She read it standing, quick, down the columns for the thing that did not sit square. And there it was, 4 years of it, entered plain because a man does not encode what he never dreams. A duchess will read, R. Gray, service fee. Again and again, spring after spring, sums that made her breath go short. Against each the moving of a foal away and the splitting of the coin. And in the margin, a mark she knew now better than her own name. SV, half to SV. 4 years of the Ravensmoor grey covered privately for coin. Half the money to a man who kept the beasts and did not price them. She had the shape of it in her head and dared not take the page. When a shadow came across the door, Josiah Pell stood in it, hearty no longer, looking at her eyes, and then at his own open book, understanding 4 years too late exactly what a coper's daughter could read. For a moment neither moved. Then something shifted behind Pell's face, and it was not anger, it was the coper's habit of weighing 2 beasts and keeping the one that pays. You'll go on home, my lady, he said slow. I'll not lay a hand on you, nor raise the yard. A widow held here crying theft does me no good in the world. But a quiet word carried to a certain man before you're off my road does me a deal of good, and costs me nothing. He stepped back to leave her the door. You've read a page you can't prove, and warned everyone that matters you've tried. Ride careful. He tipped his hat, hearty again, and it was worse than the other. My respects to his grace, if he's any notion at all you were here. A black rain came on that afternoon, and under cover of it, Simeon Vaux went to the Duke, not to the yard where a servant belonged, but up the great stair to the study, which a man does only when he means to be believed. Mercy was not called in. She learned the shape of it after, from the door she was not meant to be behind, and from Gabriel's face, which had gone back to being a face she did not know. Vaux laid it down grave and slow, the way an honest man lays down a grief. That her ladyship had been seen alone at Josiah Pell's coping yard, reading his books with none of the house any the wiser. That she was a coper's daughter, and Pell's own creature, sold into the house on purpose. That her father had been Pell's man these 20 years, and had, Vaux had heard tell of it, all the county had, set his hand years back to an agreement, in Pell's writing, to pass off one grey for another when a price wanted meeting. That the cry of switch and poison was a coper's long game. Cry the true greys down as ringers, cry the sound colt mad, so the Ravensmoor line could be bought back for nothing by the very men who had salted it. I'd not have troubled you, your grace, Vaux said soft as the rain, but she's your wife now, and it's your stable, and I'll not watch a good house robbed by them as it's opened its door to. I've served through worse,
I'll not serve through this silent. Every word was true on its face. Her father had been Pell's man. She had gone alone against her given word. That was the whole cruelty of it. The frame was cut from real cloth and needed not one lie to hang square. Gabriel did not accuse her. That was the withholder's sin, and she had married it and thought it mended, and found it was not. He came down and did the cold, formal thing his grief had taught him, gave orders, quiet, into the middle distance. The colt to be boxed again, close. The greys left untouched. Nothing handled, nor cried, nor moved, until the fair sorted the matter lawfully, before witnesses. And to her, nothing. Not a charge she could answer, not a question. He asked her nothing, because to ask was to hope, and he had decided, in one wet afternoon, that hoping got the people he loved killed. She neither wept nor begged, because a horse that pleads best is the one that does not fight the rope it cannot break. She said one thing only, flat in the cold hall, where he could not walk the short way past the yard. I went to Pell's alone, because had you stood beside me, you'd have been ruined the moment his book was read. A duke caught reading a coper's ledger, that's the county's story for a year. I'd rather be doubted by you than watch that done to you. So doubt me. She held his eyes and did not soften it. But I'll not stop working. The colt's redosed by nightfall, mark it, and comes wild again on Vaux's clock, and that clock is my whole proof. Doubt me and work anyway, or don't. I'll be at it either road. He said nothing. She had not thought he would. She heard, before she was up the stair, the bolt of the killing box drawn home again, and the first thin scream come up within the hour, exactly on the clock she had named. The dread turned round on them both by the house's own hand. They came at midnight, the pair the county had taught her to overlook. Nan first, in her nightgown and a shawl, a candle in one hand, and a thing wrapped in sacking held against her like an infant. She set it on the bed and turned back the cloth. A mash book, greasy years of it, every bucket to every horse in a cook's plain marks, and against the black colt's box 3 years of crosses and a note beside each, fouled, smelt hot, told to mind my churns. Dated. Every one dated. I kept it in the flour bin, Nan said, where no man had put his hand. 3 year I've wrote it, and been called a fool nightly. It's a churn woman's word, worth nothing alone. But you'll want it. And Dob behind her, shaking, a boy who had bolted twice and come back a third time, because a horse had shown him how. He told it whole this time, in the dark, where daylight and walls could not close his throat. The roller, the hot smell worked under it, the left hand, the low sound, the boy made to hold the head, the words you'll hang if ever you, all of it, weeping, and at the end, the thing that made it usable. But I'll say it, mistress, where they can hear, if the horse'll say it first, if he'll scream it at that hand, afore the whole county, so they know it's true, and not just Dobberstanners, then I'll stand up after and put the man's name to it. Let the horse go first. They'll believe him. They never believed me. Mercy sat between the disbelieved cook and the terrified boy, with the flour-stained book in her lap, and understood that Vaux, meaning to end her before the buyers, had built her the one thing she could never have contrived. The whole county summoned to the Duke's own yard, on a morning she now knew to the hour. He had set the stage himself. She had only to change the play. 5 weeks, she said low to the two of them. We say nothing. We move nothing. We let him think he's won the house and lost me. She closed the greasy book and held it as she'd held her father's. And on fair morning, we let the horses talk. The 5 weeks Mercy had promised ran almost out. With the fair a bare 8 days off, and the first drovers already stirring on the Colt Hallow Road, Gabriel Thorne did not go up to the great house to wait out the small hours. He took a lantern from the tackroom hook and went down the row instead. the short way, along the wall that backed the yard, the way he had not walked in 3 years. He stood at the bolt of the killing box with his hand on the cold iron. "All right," he said to it low, the way a man speaks to steady his own hand. "All right." And he drew it. The colt came off the wall, sheeted and wild, screaming into the light, redosed on Vaux's word, exactly on the clock she had named. And Gabriel, who had ordered this himself out of a wet afternoon's grief, did the thing he had refused for 3 years to do. He looked at it. He did not flinch, and did what she had shown him at another box a lifetime ago. He waited out a lull, set 2 fingers under the near jaw, and felt the heart going too fast and too long under them, a thing no honest temper could keep up. It was in his own hand now, the truth of it. Not her word carried up a stair, but his own 2 fingers on a hot vein at midnight. The madness ran on a clock, and a clock is wound by a hand. He had felt it, and could not unfeel it, and shame came up not as a wound to live inside, but as a debt to pay. He set the trap at dawn, before he went to her, because a man ought to bring more than an apology. He found Vaux in the yard, and spoke of small things, the fair, the greys, and then let fall, easy, the false coin he had minted in the dark. "Words come the true greys found," he said, light, fetched to a neighbour's barn against the fair, all quiet. He watched the man's hands as he said it. Vaux had a head collar over his arm, his fingers working a buckle, and at the word found the fingers went still. Not his face. His face stayed loyal, grave, and glad for the news. His hands stopped. A half-second, no more. Then the buckle moved again, and the easy words came. But Gabriel had learned, these weeks past, from a co-op's daughter, to read the hands a lying face forgets to govern. His and Vaux's did not agree. He went to her then. She was at the rail in the grey light, with the flower-stained book under her arm, and he came the short way, past the box, and she marked it. "I have spent 3 years," he said, "being the worst thing anyone ever said of me, because it was simpler than being wrong about it. It cost nothing to believe I killed him by inattention. It costs everything to believe I let his killer pour me my wine." The blunt voice did not spare itself, nor grovel. It laid the account down plain as she laid hers. "I doubted you because a man told me a true thing to sell me a false one, and I've no gift for telling those apart. You have. I should have stood behind your gift and did not. Say what you need of me, I'll do it." She did not make him wait for it. "I need you beside me on fair morning. Nothing more. You'll have more." He drew a paper from inside his coat, the settlement his lawyer had drawn and witnessed when first she came, and he had never spoken of. The Colt Hallow cottage and its income vested in trustees to her sole and separate use. Hers whether she bode here or lived apart from him, and want for nothing. He held it up so she could read her own name. "I had this made the week you came, meaning it a kindness, that if this marriage was a cage you'd have a key. But a key in my keeping is still my gift, and a thing given can be held over a head." He put it into her own hands. "So I have set it past my own reach. It is signed and delivered. The trustees hold it, and not I. And there is no freedom left for me to grant or withhold. It is yours already, in law, whatever you choose. If you stand in that yard tomorrow, it is because you chose to, not because you were owned into it and paid off out of it. I'll not own another living thing into an early grave. Not you, not any." She looked at the paper in her own hands, and at him, and did not thank him, for he had learned by now that she never thanked a true thing. She only met it. "Then here is the play," she said, and told it him at the rail, while the first fair carts groaned on the road. Let the sale go forward. Pell's own ledger had named the tenant's barn where the true grey stood at stud, not 12 miles off. Thady, whom no man on the road would question with a horse on a lead, would fetch her home before light, with a constable of the magistrates choosing at his side, so the taking of her was lawful and witnessed. The true grey brought up to the far paddock at first light, and held there Nan's book, dated in her apron, and one of Vaux's own buckets sealed under wax before two lads who would swear the hour, so the poison could never be cried, a thing she salted herself. Dob primed to speak, but after, when the horse had spoken first. Thady to say the craft of it where the county could hear. The magistrate and the veterinary surgeon invited as custom, so they would simply be there, unwarned, unbought, and Pell's coping book taken up the moment the man showed his face at the gate, and put straight into the magistrate's keeping, that no hand could burn it before the assizes. The colt fed clean from this hour, so that by fair morning the clock would have run down at last and stopped. "He set the stage himself," she said, watching the carts come. "We've only to let the horses talk." "And if they will not?" he asked, not doubting her now, only counting the cost as a man does before a leap. "They can't help it. That's why I trust them over men. A horse can't be paid to forget what was done to it." She shifted the greasy book under her arm. "Neither, it turns out, can a churn woman, nor a boy. He taught the whole yard silence, and never once thought the silent things were keeping count. The frost was gone by fair morning, and in its place came the whole county, up the Colt Hallow road in carts and on foot and horseback, to the opened gate of a house that had kept itself shut for 3 years. Vaux had summoned them all, buyers from 3 shires, the gentry in their fair day best, the auctioneer, and because he had never thought to wonder why the Duke pressed the invitation so warm, Sir Ambrose Kingsley the magistrate, and Mr. Reeve the veterinary surgeon, at the front, with no notion they had been placed. Half were the same faces that had watched a widow handed out through a carriage window 8 weeks gone. They came to buy the famous Ravensmoor grey. They stayed to watch her crowned. Vaux opened it himself, because a man cannot help but reach for the thing that has always worked. "Your Grace," he said it loud, for the yard, easy and grave, the loyal servant grieved past silence. "Before the sale, there's a matter wants settling. Her ladyship has cried my black colt drugged, not mad these 8 weeks. Well, let her prove it. Let her handle the killer loose, before you all, if she's so certain of her physic. I'll not have Ravensmoor beasts sold under a slander." He spread his hands. "Or let her own silence answer for her." It was a death sentence, and he offered it smiling, and the county murmured, because they had all heard that horse scream. "I'll answer it," Mercy said. She did not go to the box. She went first to Nan. "Bring the book," she said, "and the bucket." And Nan Sowerby waded to the front in her fair day apron, the greasy mash book held to her chest, and, in her other hand, the feed pail she had kept 8 days sealed. She set it before Mr. Reeve. 3 year I've wrote what went to that box," Nan said to the surgeon, her voice not shaking though her hands did. "Marks for clean, and crosses for foul, every one dated. Smell the bottom, sir, and tell these people whether it's honest bran." Reeve crouched, turned the pail to the light, and bent to the muck at the bottom, smelling it long, sifting it under the point of his knife. His face changed. "This is not honest feed," he said, flat and carrying. "Some sharp stuff's been worked through it, an irritant, a stimulant. Given steady, a thing like this would fret a horse half to madness, and never quite kill it." He rose. "This colt was not born mad. He was fed mad." "Given steady," Mercy said, and stopped 8 days since. She looked at Vaux, then the county. "You've all heard this horse. You've called him a murderer. Now hear him quiet." She nodded to Thady, and the old man drew the bolt of the killing box. The black colt walked out into the yard on a slack rope and stood. He stood in the middle of that crowded court, ears soft and forward, blowing once at the strangeness of so many people, and dropped his head to lip at the straw. a horse 100 souls had heard scream for 3 years, gone quiet as a cob at a plough. Somewhere a woman began to cry. The madness had been in the bucket. She had taken it away. And there he stood, on 4 still legs for anyone with ears to hear. Vaux's mouth had gone to a line. His own dare had detonated in his hand, and the yard was beginning to know it too. "That proves a drugged horse," he said, and his voice was still level, still reaching. "Not who. A coper's widow with a grievance could have salted that pail herself, this morning, to hang an honest man. This morning." Mercy did not let him finish it. She turned to the surgeon. "That was the last bucket this man carried to the box with his own hand, taken from him while it was still warm, waxed and dated on the spot, before 2 lads who will swear the day, and the seal you broke just now was whole. A grievance can salt an empty pail. It cannot reach back through an unbroken seal." She held Vaux's eyes. "You fed this horse that bucket. She only kept it." Reeve turned the pail, found the waxed date, showed it round, and nodded once, and that was the end of that road for Vaux. "The mare," Mercy went on, before he could find another. "You came to buy a grey. Let's be sure which grey you're buying." The auctioneer, uncertain now, had the home paddock mare led into the court, the clean-legged, brown-eyed grey the county had believed in for 4 years. Mercy would not go near her. She walked to the far end of the court, 60 feet off, turned, and set 2 notes against her teeth, Kit's whistle, her father's whistle, and called the mare's name across the silent yard. Damson. The grey did not turn an ear. Mercy whistled again, clean and carrying, and called again. The mare stood dull and incurious under the auctioneer's hand, cropped at nothing, gave no more answer than the barrel the book lay on. "A champion," Mercy said, "that a boy of this house could bring across a field with 2 notes. Watch her not know her own name." And then, into the held breath of the yard, she lifted her voice toward the far paddock gate, where Dob had stood since dawn, with a lead in his hand. "Bring her up." Over the ridge at the gate, a grey came through and answered. Her name in a whistle, and a whistle straight back. A high, glad throat sound flung across the court. The true damson came on down the yard at a swinging walk that put her head at Mercy's shoulder, wall-eyed on the off-side, an old splint standing proud and plain on the near fore, writ in a dead duke's own marks. She thrust her grey nose into Mercy's hands and would not be got away from the woman who had whistled. "Mr. Reeve," Mercy said. "Read her against the stud book in the Duke's hand, the splint, the wall-eye, 15 years old in the old Duke's copper plate." She stroked the true grey's face. "That's damson. That other's a stranger you've called her name at for 4 years." She did not raise her voice for the last of it. The mare in this Duke's paddock was never his. She was sold out the back, foal by foal, a ringer in her place, and the estate told the great grey had gone barren. The county had heard the switch, at the cost of 1 whistle. There was no arguing a mare that came to her own name across a yard, only the sound of it, still hanging in the cold air, and 100 people who had heard it. Sir Ambrose Kingsley stirred at the front. "A switched mare is theft," the magistrate said, slow. "Grave theft. But your title, madam, speaks of a boy's death. Where is the boy in a stolen horse?" "Here," Mercy said, and put her hand on the black colt's neck. She had 3 men girth him in the open court where all could see, Thady, the honest home farm lad, and Mr. Reeve himself, that none could cry collusion, and to each the colt stood, shifting his weight, blowing, no more troubled than a horse at a trough. "Now," Mercy said, "let the man who kept this box these 3 years girth his own horse." She looked at Vaux across the yard. "Come to him as you've always come. I'll not touch him, only girth him." Vaux did not move. "Your grace bids you," Gabriel said. from beside his wife, the first he had spoken, very quiet, and it carried to the walls. Vaux came. He had no road left but forward, and perhaps he thought the horse would fail her. Perhaps a man who has managed a thing so long cannot believe it will not still answer his hand. He came at the colt's near side. His left hand rose to the roller, and low in his throat came the two-note chirrup he made to a horse he was about to hurt. The colt came apart. He went rigid to the tail. The whites came up round his eye. The sweat broke black on him in a single breath. He screamed. The killing box scream. The sound the whole county had buried a boy to, torn out of him fresh at that hand, and that sound alone. He flung himself the length of the rope, and stood shaking, sheeted, guarding a wall that was 3 years gone. Into that scream, a boy's voice broke. I held his head. Dob Hartley was through the crowd, white and shaking and past all stammering. The way of it come up out of him too deep now to catch on his teeth. That morning, the steeplechase, Master Vaux, bid me hold the black's head, and he worked summat under the roller, hot. I smelt it hot, and he says it's liniment, and after, when the boy was dead, he says I'd hang if ever I told, that they'd say 'twere me held him. He was weeping and did not stop. It's the same hand. It's the same little sound. I've heard it 3 year in my sleep. He killed Master Kit, and let the horse take it, and me hold my tongue or hang. He turned to the county, his voice breaking clean across. The horse can't lie for him, nor can't I no more. The horse's terror and the boy's confession landed in the same breath, and there was no one hearing either. Mr. Reeve crossed to the shaking colt, ran a hand down its near side, and lifted the edge of the roller. "Here is where it was done," he said, and turned the beast so the county could see the old scar along the girth place, a hand's breadth of hide gone white and hairless. A blistering agent laid on bare skin would burn a horse so, and set it frantic to be girthed, and send it bolting the moment a rider's weight came down. Worked into the hide, this not the feed, the morning the boy died. His eye went to Vaux's left hand where it hung, and the counties followed, to the same old white ruin blistered across the palm. And a man who lays that on bare-handed pays for it in his own hide. There is his receipt. It was Gabriel who read the arithmetic into the record, in the flat, plain voice, because it was owed to Kit that his own brother say it. From Pell's own coping book, 4 years of private stud fees for R. Gray, foals moved, coin split, the initials SV against each. And from her father's day book, dated to the very season, the true damson was cried Baron, a coper's plain record that the grey he'd sold this house, sound and in foal, was lost within the 12-month to a barrenness he set down, in the margin he did not believe. Vaux made his last cast, and it was not greed, but the true root of the man, and it came up ugly. 30 years I gave this house, he said, his voice iron now, all pretence of grief gone. Kept its beasts, kept its silence when the old duke bred it near to ruin. I was to have the head groom's cottage and a pension, and he died with it unwrit. And this one, he flung a hand at Gabriel, never thought to ask what was owed a man who'd bled 30 years while dukes grieved. So I took my wage out of the grey, since none would give it me honest, and I'd do it again. He heard the confession in it too late, and lunged back to the lie. But not the boy. Never the boy. You'll hang an honest servant on the word of a coper's barren widow, sold for £4, bred no better than a mule, who's played her horse tricks to snare a grieving man and rob his stable from his own bed. She invented these scars. She did not invent them, said Sir Ambrose Kingsley. The magistrate had the old stud book open in his 2 hands, the dead duke's own marks under his thumb. Set down 15 years since, he said, and looked up, and his voice went across the court. 15 years, Master Vaux, before this lady was ever in the county, before she was widowed, before your Pell ever heard her name. She did not invent these scars. She read them, and a dead duke's pen agrees with her, word for word. He shut the book, had Nan Sowerby and the boy give their account upon oath before the whole county, and set their names in his pocket-book. Then he turned to the parish constable at the gate. "You have heard them sworn. Take him in charge." The constable had Vaux by both arms before the man had done drawing breath, and Sir Ambrose committed him then and there to the county jail, to answer the whole of it at the summer assizes. At the gate, Josiah Pell, who had come to buy and stood too long to watch, found the way barred. The buyers drew their custom away in a body. Vaux went across the yard he had ruled so long, past the box he had kept 3 years, and did not look at the horse. The horse, quiet now, watched him go, and then it was only the crowning left. The settlement was long since made, signed and witnessed the week she came to this house, and put past his own hand into the trustee's keeping. Gabriel had the solicitor who drew it bring the recorded copy forward now. The Colt Hallow Cottage, and its income vested to her sole and separate use, and held it up so any who cared to could see her name. "My wife came to this house, sold for £4, he said, and I have heard men in this yard this morning call her a coper's widow, bred no better than a mule." He did not raise his voice, and every soul there leaned to catch it. "She is the reason my brother's name will be recut on his stone, without the word reckless. She is the reason a poisoned horse grazes loose in my yard, and an honest boy holds his head up. I'll not have any man think she stays for a duke's roof over her head." He held the paper high for them all to see. "This was signed and sealed, and put past my own hand the week she came to this house. The cottage and its income are hers-in-law, her own and separate. Whether she bides under my roof or lives 100 miles from it, she is free of me entire, and was before ever this morning came. No cottage held over her, no price, no debt. Whatever she does now, she does by her own choosing." Mercy looked at the paper, and at him, and did not thank him. She put 2 notes against her teeth instead, and whistled, low, her father's call, out across the crowded court. From the far paddock and the near, from the loose box and the yard they came. 6pence first, bucking through the parting crowd. Behind him, the weanlings she had gentled that spring, a dozen at the trot, ears pricked forward, ranging up around her, until she stood in a press of soft eyes and warm flanks, a coper's widow the county had sold for £4, every horse in that yard answering her, and no one else. "I keep the horses," she said, into the silence, plain so all of them heard it, and the Duke, and Gabriel Thorne, the 6th of his name, who had gone the long way round his own yard for 3 years rather than pass a shot-box, went down on one knee in the wet straw before the whole watching county, and bowed his head to her hand where it lay on the true grey's neck, and let them all see the powerful man undone, his brother's name clean at last, his stable honest, his wife her own. Mercy laid her free hand on his bowed head, light as she'd lay it on a frightened thing come gentle at last, and let the county see her let him. Over by the emptied killing box, Nan Sowerby wept into her fair day apron. 3 years of a scorned woman's word made law before the whole shire, and old Thady had his hat off again, and Dob Hartley stood straight-backed among the horses, with the tears drying on his face, a boy no one would ever again call simple. The frost was 3 weeks gone, and it was into a warm May dark that the true damson lay down in the deep straw of the far foaling box, and began her labour. Mercy knelt in it, sleeves turned back, and hands sure, and Gabriel Thorne stood over them both, holding the lantern. "Lower there," Mercy said, not looking up, and he brought the flame down where her hands wanted it, and that was the thing she marked, even now. A man who for 3 years could not carry a light past a shut-box stood in the warm reek of a foaling, and did not flinch, only turned the flame a little as she asked, The mare did her own work, as the good ones do. The long dark straining, the pause, the sudden slick rush of it, and then a foal steamed in the straw, grey as its dam under the birth wet. Mercy cleared its nose with a finger, and stood it in her lap, out of a cold that was no longer cold. The mare turned her wall-eyed head to lip at it, and Gabriel let out a breath he seemed to have held since 1816. "There," Mercy said. "There she is." She told him the world's business while they waited for the foal to find its legs. Vaux was bound over for the summer assizes, held close in the county jail, and would not keep another horse while he lived. Pell's coping yard stood shut and chained, the man run off to answer for 4 years of ledgers he could not unwrite. Dob Hartley was Thadde's own lad now, bound to the head groom by an indenture the parish and his guardian had set their hands to, for all it was his own asking that began it, and the black colt grazed loose in the low meadow he had once screened in a box beside, sound and gentle, called Killer by no one in 3 shires any longer. And in Colt Hallow churchyard, the mason had struck the word reckless from a boy's stone and cut it clean again, plain, only the name, the years, and beloved of horses. "Nan says the kitchen's the warmest room in the house again," Mercy said. "She says it like it's her doing. It is." "You came here for the horses," he said, "into the warm dark." "I did." "And stayed?" "For you," she said, and did not look up from the grey foal, and that was the whole of it, and enough. The foal gathered its legs. It tried them, folded, tried again, and on the 3rd heave came up shaking on 4 splayed grey legs, new to all the world, and stood. Mercy set 2 notes against her teeth and gave them, low, into the warm dark, her father's whistle, worn smooth by a spring of use, and the foal's head came round to her, ears working, before it had learned its own name or anything else at all. And Gabriel Thorne, the 6th of his name, who had flinched from every horse in this house and gone the long way round his own yard for 3 years, laughed once, quiet, wondering, in the dark of a box a death had sealed and a birth had opened. And Mercy heard 3 years go out of him on the sound of it. On the shelf by the door, her father's daybook stood closed, its work done at last. She left it where it was.